The general handed me the manifest and gave me 3 rules. Rule number 1. Do not stop the truck for any reason. Not for gas, not for the bathroom, and definitely not for the police. Rule number 2. If you hear banging from the trailer, turn up your radio. Do not listen to it. And rule number 3, and this is the one that made my blood run cold, he said, if the containment light on your dashboard turns red, do not pull over. Just unlock your door, jump out of the moving cab, and run into the woods, because if that light is red, you are already dead. I've been driving heavy haul for the Department of Defense for 15 years. I've moved nuclear warheads. I've moved chemical weapons, but nothing ever scared me. Until last night. Because 3 hours ago, somewhere on a dark highway between the Mississippi border and Kentucky, the light on my dashboard turned red. My name is Richard, at least that's what it says on my ID badge. I'm what they call a priority logistics contractor. Basically, when Uncle Sam finds something he doesn't want the public to see, I'm the guy who moves it from the hole they found it in to the hole they're going to bury it in. Yesterday afternoon, I got a call for a rush job. The payout was triple my usual rate. The pickup location was a temporary military encampment deep in the Mississippi backwoods, someplace near a swamp that the locals were terrified of. Now, if you follow the news on the underground forums, you know about the rumors coming out of Mississippi lately. Search teams going missing, campers ripped apart. They say there was an alpha predator hunting down there. Well, when I pulled my rig into that muddy camp, I didn't see a search team. I saw a capture team. Dozens of guys in unmarked tactical gear were hosing down a massive, reinforced steel container. It was covered in mud and blood. The officer in charge walked up to my window. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He didn't tell me what was inside. He just pointed to the GPS coordinates on the paperwork. Destination, Sector 4, Daniel Boone National Forest, Kentucky. He looked at me with dead eyes and said, "Drive fast, Richard. The sedatives are only supposed to last for 6 hours. If you don't get it to the Sector 4 secure facility before midnight, God help us all." I checked my watch. I had 5 hours to make a 6-hour drive. I put the truck in gear, checked my mirrors, and pulled out onto the highway. Everything was fine for the first 100 miles, but then the sedatives must have worn off early. I pulled onto the interstate, the 18 wheels of my rig groaning under the weight of the payload. The rain had started to come down in earnest, turning the Mississippi landscape into a blur of gray and black. The wipers slapped a frantic rhythm against the glass, fighting a losing battle against the deluge. It was the kind of storm that makes you feel like you're driving through the bottom of an ocean, cut off from the rest of the world. I kept my eyes glued to the asphalt, white-knuckling the steering wheel. The truck felt different tonight. I've hauled lead steel beams, even an M1 Abrams tank once. Heavy is heavy, but this felt dense. It felt unstable. Every time I took a curve, I could feel a strange inertia in the trailer behind me, like the cargo was leaning into the turn or maybe fighting against it. It wasn't the dead weight of machinery. It was the shifting, unpredictable weight of something biological. I checked my mirrors for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Usually on a job with this level of clearance, I'd have a convoy, a lead car to clear the traffic and a trail car to make sure nobody gets too close. But the officer back at the campsite had been clear. Low profile, no escort. We don't want to draw attention. So there I was, driving a rolling prison cell down I-55, completely alone. The dashboard clock glowed a neon green, 8:42 p.m. I did the math in my head. I had left the site at 8:00 sharp. That meant I was 42 minutes into the 6-hour window. The sedatives were supposed to hold until 2:00 a.m. If I kept my foot heavy and didn't hit traffic, I could make it to the Daniel Boone National Forest by 1:30. I dropped the trailer at the Sector 4 gate. Let those poor bastards at the security shack deal with the paperwork. and get the hell out of there before whatever was in the box opened its eyes. I reached for my thermos of coffee, my hand shaking just enough to spill a few hot drops onto my jeans. I cursed, swerving slightly into the shoulder. The rumble strips roared beneath the tires, a jarring, mechanical vibration that rattled my teeth. I corrected the wheel, pulling back into the lane, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Get a grip, Richard," I muttered to the empty cab. "It's just a job, it's just a delivery." But the silence of the cab felt oppressive. I turned on the CB radio, hopping to catch some chatter from other truckers, just to feel a connection to humanity. Usually, Channel 19 is full of noise, guys complaining about way stations, weather, or lot lizards. Tonight, it was dead air, just the hiss of static rising and falling like the breathing of a giant lung. I turned the volume down and focused on the road. The rain was washing the mud off the trailer. In the side mirror, I could see the red running lights reflecting off the wet steel of the container. It looked slick, almost organic, like the skin of a beetle. The mud from the swamp was streaming off it in red rivulets, looking uncomfortably like blood in the glare of the taillights. Then I felt it. It wasn't a sound, not yet. It was a shudder, a distinct, heavy lurch from the trailer. It felt like a car had rear-ended me, but I checked the mirrors and the road behind me was empty darkness. The truck jerked forward, the engine whining as the momentum shifted. My stomach dropped. "Wind," I told myself. "Just a gust of wind catching the broadside." But the trees on the side of the highway weren't moving. There was no wind. The shudder happened again, stronger this time. The cab rocked on its suspension. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. This wasn't shifting gear. Gear doesn't move uphill. Gear doesn't push back. Somewhere in the darkness behind me, amidst the roar of the rain and the hum of the diesel engine, something inside that steel box had just shifted its weight. The sedatives weren't failing. They were already gone. And I still had 400 miles to go. I didn't want to look in the rearview mirror again, but my eyes were drawn to it like a moth to a bug zapper. The trailer was steady now, just gliding over the wet pavement, but the memory of that lurch lingered in my muscles. I could still feel the phantom sway in the steering wheel. I tried to convince myself it was the liquid slosh of the fuel tanks, or maybe a loose strap on the internal cargo rigging. But deep down, in the lizard part of my brain that tracks predators, I knew better. Rigging doesn't move voluntarily. 10 miles passed in agonizing silence. I was just starting to get my heart rate under triple digits when the sound started. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the tires and the drone of the rain. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like metal on metal, something sharp being dragged slowly across the inner wall of the container. It was a rhythmic, testing sound. It wasn't the sound of an animal thrashing in panic. It was the sound of something probing for a weakness. I reached for the volume knob on the radio, my hand trembling. Rule number 2. If you hear banging, turn up the radio. The general's voice echoed in my head. It seemed like a stupid rule at the time, something you tell a child afraid of a thunderstorm. Now I understood. Panic kills on the highway. If I listened to that scratching for too long, I'd drive this rig into a bridge abutment just to make it stop. I cranked the volume. A classic rock station out of Memphis blasted into the cab, the guitars screaming, drowning out the subtle noise from the back. I gripped the wheel at 10 and 2, starring a hole through the windshield, forcing myself to sing along. I needed to drown out the reality of what was happening 6 feet behind my head. But then came the smell. The truck's climate control system pulled air from the intake outside the cab, right between the tractor and the trailer. Suddenly, the vents blasted me with a scent so thick I could taste it. It wasn't the diesel fumes or the ozone of the storm. It was a heavy, musky stench, wet fur, rot, and something sharp and metallic like old pennies. I gagged, fumbling to hit the recirculate button, trying to seal the cab. My eyes started to water. It was the smell of a wet dog, amplified by 1,000. It was the smell of something wild and unclean. It filled the small space instantly, clinging to the upholstery, clinging to my clothes. It triggered a primal alarm in my nervous system, a biological warning that humans haven't needed for 10,000 years. Predator. Close. I was choking on the air, wiping tears from my eyes, when the first real blow landed. Wham! The impact was massive. The entire semi-truck shuddered. It felt like a cannonball had been fired inside the trailer, hitting the front wall directly behind the cab. My head snapped forward, whiplashing against the seat. The force was enough to break the traction of the rear drive tires on the slick asphalt. The truck fishtailed. The trailer swung left, pushing the nose of the cab toward the center divide. "HAA!" I screamed, wrestling with the steering wheel, fighting the hydroplane. I pumped the brakes, correcting the skid, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The tires caught grip again, and I straightened the rig out, pulling it back into the lane. I was hyperventilating now. That wasn't a shift in weight. That was a strike. Whatever was inside that box wasn't just awake, it was angry. And it was strong enough to shake an 80,000-pound vehicle moving at 65 miles per hour. I looked down at the dashboard. My eyes locked onto the small cluster of warning lights near the speedometer, specifically the one labeled CONT, integrity. It flickered. It didn't turn solid red, not yet. It just blinked, a quick, angry flash of crimson light that vanished as quickly as it appeared. A warning shot. The impact had damaged a sensor or maybe loosened a seal. I looked at the digital clock, 9:15 p.m. The sedatives hadn't just worn off. The creature was fully active, and I was still 300 miles from Sector 4. I wasn't a driver anymore. I was the meat in a rolling can, and the thing with the can opener was waking up. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened when the state trooper tried to pull me over in the next section. And trust me, it gets messy. But first, a quick warning. The story you are hearing is part of a larger breach at Sector 4. If you want to survive the full investigation and hear the stories the government tries to delete, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We upload the truth every single day. Don't miss it. Now, let's see what happens when a state trooper tries to pull over a monster. The flashing blue lights in my rearview mirror were the last thing I wanted to see, but given how violently the rig had just swerved across 3 lanes, I wasn't surprised. A Tennessee state trooper was right on my bumper, his siren wailing, cutting through the drumming of the rain. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. Rule number 1, do not stop. I looked at the speedometer. I was doing 75 in a 55 zone, hauling a swaying trailer that smelled like a slaughterhouse. If I pulled over, the trooper would walk up to the cab. He'd smell the rot. He'd ask for the manifest. He might even ask me to open the back. And then he would die, and I would die. I made a decision that went against every instinct I had as a professional driver. I kept my foot on the accelerator. I didn't touch the brakes. The trooper didn't like that. He pulled out from behind me, accelerating into the passing lane. He was aggressive, pulling his cruiser right alongside my cab, matching my speed. I couldn't look at him, but I could feel his eyes boring into the side of my head. He blasted his air horn, a deep, angry blare meant to shake me out of my stupor. "Go away," I whispered, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. "Just go away." The siren was loud. It was a piercing, oscillating shriek that vibrated the glass of the windows, and that noise did something worse than annoy the trooper. It agitated the cargo. Thump, thump, thump. The banging from the trailer changed rhythm. It wasn't just a blind strike against the front wall anymore. It was rapid, coordinated pounding against the side wall, the driver's side, the side facing the trooper. I watched in horror through the side mirror. The metal skin of the trailer was rippling. Each impact left a reverse dent, a bulge pushing outward from the inside. The creature hated the siren. It was attacking the noise. The trooper must have seen it. I saw his cruiser swerve slightly, drifting away from my truck as if he'd been shoved by an invisible hand. He turned on his spotlight, shining the beam directly onto the side of my trailer. The bright white light illuminated the steel just as another massive impact hit the wall. Crunch! This time the metal didn't just dent, it tore. A jagged, vertical gash opened up about halfway down the trailer, right where the "Do Not Overtake" warning sticker was peeling off. It was only a few inches wide, but it was enough. Through the rain and the spotlight beam, I saw something protrude from the tier. It wasn't a hand. It wasn't a paw. It was a claw, black, hooked, and the size of a butcher knife. It slashed at the air, grasping blindly, trying to widen the hole. The trooper saw it too. I saw his face in the glow of his dashboard lights, a mask of pure confusion turning into terror. He slammed on his brakes. The cruiser dropped back instantly, disappearing from my side window as he put distance between himself and the thing tearing its way out of my truck. For a second, I thought he was retreating. Then I heard his voice crackle over the CB radio. He must have scanned my frequency. "Driver of the northbound rig, pull over immediately. You have someone in the trailer, pull over." I grabbed the mic, my voice shaking so bad I could barely speak. "I can't stop. Stay back. Do not approach the vehicle." "Pull over or I will disable your vehicle," the trooper screamed back. I looked at the dashboard. The containment integrity light was no longer flickering. It was a solid, unblinking crimson. The seal was broken. The vacuum was gone. The creature could smell fresh air and it could see the blue lights. I floored it. The engine roared, the turbo whining as I pushed the truck past 80 miles per hour on the slick road. I watched the rearview mirror. The trooper was coming back. He was brave, I'll give him that. Or maybe just stupid. He was closing the gap, positioning himself to try a pit maneuver or maybe shoot out my tires. Then the claw in the side of the trailer vanished. The scratching stopped. The banging stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then a sound erupted that drowned out the siren, the engine, and the thunder. It was a howl, but not a wolf's howl. It was deeper, filled with a resonant, sub-bass frequency that rattled the fillings in my teeth. It was a roar of absolute dominance. It came through the tear in the metal, loud and clear. And then the creature threw its entire body weight against the weakened side of the trailer. The truck listed dangerously to the left, the tires screaming for traction. I fought the wheel, countersteering, praying the hitch would hold. In the mirror, I saw the side of the trailer bow out almost 2 feet. The metal groaned, rivets popping like gunfire. A massive, dark shape pushed through the rent steel, head and shoulders bursting out into the rainy night. It snapped its jaws at the trooper's car, a blur of fur and teeth. The trooper didn't try to stop me again. He slammed on his brakes so hard his cruiser spun out, sliding sideways into the median grass, his headlights spinning wildly before coming to a rest. I was alone on the road again. But now I had a hole in the side of my trailer, and the Mississippi Alpha knew exactly how to get out. The silence that followed the state trooper's crash was worse than the siren. The radio was dead again. I had smashed the volume knob down in a panic during the chase. Now, the only sound was the wind screaming over the jagged tear in the trailer's flank. The hole was acting like a wind scoop, dragging the 80,000-pound rig to the left, fighting my grip on the wheel every inch of the way. The red light on the dashboard was staring at me. Containment integrity failed. The general's words played on a loop in my skull. "If that light is red, you are already dead." He had told me to jump, to open the door and roll out onto the asphalt. At 30 miles per hour, that's a broken leg. At 85 on a rain-slicked interstate, that's a smear on the pavement. I was trapped in a binary choice between suicide by asphalt or suicide by monster. I chose to keep driving. I checked the mirrors. I couldn't see the creature sticking out of the hole anymore. The tear in the metal was dark. Was it waiting? Was it hurt? Then the truck lurched again. But this time the sway didn't come from the side. The suspension compressed heavily, not left or right, but down. The roof of the cab groaned. My blood turned to ice. The weight wasn't in the trailer anymore. It had climbed out. It was moving along the top of the rig. I heard the scratching, scritch, screech, scritch, moving forward. It was crawling over the refrigeration unit, moving from the trailer to the tractor. It was coming for the driver. I grabbed the CB mic, screaming blindly into the static. Mayday, mayday. This is duty contractor Richard on I-65 North. I have a hostile biological asset loose on the vehicle, requesting immediate backup. Anyone. Static hissed back. Nobody was listening, or maybe they were and they just didn't care. Thump. Something heavy landed on the roof of the cab, right above my head. The thin sheet metal dented inward, the interior fabric headliner bulging down like a tumor. Dust and rust rained down onto my lap. I swerved the truck violently to the right, aiming for the rumble strips, trying to shake it off. The rig groaned, tires squealing, threatening to jackknife. The thing on the roof didn't budge. It dug in. I heard the distinct, terrifying sound of claws puncturing metal, pop, 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 like a can opener punching through aluminum. It was anchoring itself. Then a face appeared. It swung down from the roof, hanging upside down in front of the windshield. I screamed. I slammed on the brakes, but my foot slipped off the pedal as my body recoiled in pure, primal terror. It wasn't a wolf. It was a nightmare woven out of muscle and hate. Lightning flashed, illuminating it in a strobe light horror show. Massive, wet gray fur. Ears that were pinned back against a skull that looked too wide, too human. And those eyes, glowing amber in the headlights of the oncoming traffic, staring through the glass, staring right at my throat. It snarled, a spray of thick saliva hitting the windshield. It raised a hand with thumbs, a hand that looked like a man's hand if that man was built to kill God, and slammed it against the safety glass. Crack! A spiderweb fracture exploded across the windshield, directly in front of my face. It raised its fist to strike again. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit on the passenger seat, the only weapon I had. I aimed it at the glass, right between those amber eyes, and pulled the trigger. Boom! The flare shattered the already weakened windshield, exploding outward in a ball of blinding red phosphorus. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, deafening sound that shattered my eardrums. The burning magnesium stuck to its fur. It let go of the roof, thrashing in pain, and tumbled backward over the hood. I felt the thud as 800 pounds of muscle hit the grill, then rolled under the wheels. The truck bucked violently as the tires rolled over the massive obstruction. I fought to keep it straight, gasping for air, my ears ringing, the cab filled with the smell of sulfur and burnt hair. I looked in the rearview mirror. A dark, burning shape was tumbling down the highway behind me, glowing red in the darkness. I had killed it. I had actually killed it. I let out a hysterical, sobbing laugh. I wiped the glass from my face, my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. But then I looked at the mirror again. The burning shape on the road stopped tumbling. It stood up. The red flare was still sizzling on its shoulder, illuminating its form like a demon in hell. It didn't limp. It didn't fall. It stood in the middle of the highway, watching me drive away. And then it started to run. The wind coming through the shattered windshield was a physical blow, a freezing hurricane of rain and glass dust that made it almost impossible to keep my eyes open. I grabbed a pair of safety glasses from the dashboard cubby, standard PPE I usually ignored, and shoved them onto my face. The world was a blurred nightmare of wet asphalt and darkness, illuminated only by the strobe-like flashes of lightning. I had the pedal mashed to the floor. The speedometer needle was vibrating past 85, hovering near the 90 mark where the engine governor would kick in. The massive diesel engine screamed, pushed far beyond its safe operating limits. I didn't care. If the engine blew, I'd coast. If the tires burst, I'd drive on the rims. I just needed distance. I glanced at the side mirror. The red glow of the magnesium flare was still visible in the darkness behind me. It wasn't fading. It was bobbing, rhythmic and terrifyingly fast. It looked like a demonic firefly, weaving through the traffic I had left in the dust. Cars were swerving, brake lights painting the mist red as drivers reacted to the burning nightmare sprinting down the center lane. It was catching up. "It's not possible," I screamed over the roar of the wind. "Nothing runs that fast, nothing." But the Mississippi Alpha did. It wasn't running like a dog or a wolf. It was running like a cheetah, its spine flexing, its stride covering 20 feet at a time. Every time its claws hit the pavement, I imagined sparks flying. It was closing the gap, 100 yards, 50 yards, 20. It pulled up alongside the trailer. I looked down from the cab through the broken window. The flare was still stuck in its shoulder, sizzling against wet fur, the skin around it blistered and black. The creature didn't seem to care. It turned its massive head toward me. Its lips pulled back, exposing gums that looked black in the moonlight. It wasn't snarling anymore. It was grinning. It knew I couldn't shoot it again. It knew I was trapped in this metal box. I jerked the steering wheel to the left, swerving the semi into the passing lane, trying to sideswipe it, to crush it against the concrete median barrier. The creature was too fast. It anticipated the move. It dropped back instantly, letting the trailer swing wildly into the empty space, sparks showering as the rim of the rear tire ground against the concrete wall. Then it made its move. It didn't jump for the cab this time. It dove underneath the trailer. My blood ran cold. The air lines. Semi-trucks run on air brakes. The connection between the tractor and the trailer is a set of rubber hoses, the glad hands. If those lines are cut, the emergency brakes on the trailer automatically lock up to prevent a runaway truck. If the brakes locked up at 90 miles per hour on wet pavement, the trailer would jackknife instantly. It would swing around and crush the cab like a soda can. "No, no, no," I yelled, swerving right, trying to shake it loose from the undercarriage. I heard the sound of tearing rubber, a loud that cut through the storm. The truck lurched violently. The trailer brakes slammed on. The wheels stopped spinning and started skidding. 80,000 pounds of momentum tried to push the tractor forward while the trailer tried to anchor itself to the road. The rear of the truck began to swing out. I was jackknifing. I did the only thing I could do. I slammed on the accelerator. I needed to pull the tractor forward faster than the trailer could drag it back. It was a tug-of-war between the engine's torque and the friction of the locked tires. Smoke, thick, white and smelling of burnt rubber, poured from the back, instantly blinding the drivers behind me. I fought the wheel, countersteering into the slide, sweating bullets. The rig groaned, metal screaming in protest. Slowly, agonizingly, the trailer straightened out. I was dragging it now, the rear tires locked and smoking, flat-spotting the rubber, but I was still moving. I checked the mirror. The creature rolled out from under the wheels, tumbling across the highway. It stood up, shaking its head. I had bought myself a few seconds. But I was losing speed. With the trailer brakes locked, I couldn't hold 90. The speedometer dropped, 70, 60, 50. I saw the green exit sign ahead, illuminated by my one working headlight. Exit 49, Daniel Boone National Forest. Sector 4 was 20 miles deep in those woods. I had to get off the highway. I couldn't fight this war in public anymore. I yanked the wheel, taking the exit ramp at a dangerous speed, the locked trailer tires screaming like banshees as I dragged the beast into the darkness of the forest. The exit ramp curved sharply into the darkness, the asphalt transitioning from the smooth interstate to a cracked, two-lane state road. The drag of the locked trailer brakes was killing my momentum. The engine roared, temperature gauge climbing into the red, fighting to pull the dead weight up the slight incline into the forest. I was doing 40 now, a sitting duck. I checked the mirrors. No burning red light behind me. The flare must have finally burned out or fallen off. But that was worse. Now I couldn't see it. The woods of the Daniel Boone National Forest closed in on both sides of the road, walls of dense pine and oak that seemed to swallow the light of my single headlamp. It was the perfect hunting ground. I grabbed the CB mic again, desperate. Sector 4 security, this is Transport Unit Alpha 1. I am 10 miles out. I have a catastrophic containment failure. Hostile is in pursuit. I repeat, hostile is loose and in pursuit. Static, then a voice cut through. It wasn't the scrambled, robotic voice from the other stories. It was human, terrified. Alpha 1, this is gate control. Turn back. Do not approach the gate. I repeat, do not approach the... Click, the transmission cut dead. Hello, gate control, I screamed. I can't turn back, I'm dragging a dead trailer. Open the damn gate. Nothing, just the hiss of the rain. I couldn't stop. Turning a semi-truck around on a narrow forest road with locked brakes was impossible. My only option was to reach the facility. They had walls. They had guns. They had to help me. Then the truck lurched again. Not from the back this time, from the front. Something heavy hit the hood. I didn't see where it came from. It must have leaped from the tree line. It landed on the engine cowling with a metallic crunch that buckled the fiberglass hood. It wasn't the Alpha. It was smaller, leaner, maybe 6 feet tall, with grayish-brown fur matted with rain. It snarled at me through the shattered windshield, its eyes glowing green in the dash lights. A second one. My stomach dropped. The legends were true. Wolves hunt in packs. The Alpha hadn't just been chasing me, it had been driving me. It had herded me off the highway, away from the witnesses, right into the ambush. The smaller wolf raised a fist to smash through the remaining glass. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt, the sudden stop launching the creature off the hood. It tumbled onto the wet asphalt in front of me. I didn't wait for it to stand up. I stomped on the gas. The massive bumper of the Kenworth surged forward. Thud. I felt the impact through the chassis. The truck rolled over the creature, a sickening bump of the tires crushing bone. I didn't look back. I kept the pedal down, the engine screaming as I dragged the trailer forward again. But now shadows were moving in the trees on both sides of the road. 4, 5, maybe 6 pairs of eyes reflecting my headlight. They were loping alongside the truck, matching my speed easily. I wasn't delivering a prisoner. I was delivering dinner. I saw a sign flash past. Restricted area, use of deadly force authorized. Do it, I yelled at the empty woods. Use deadly force, shoot these things. I rounded a bend and saw it, the main gate of Sector 4. It wasn't the sanctuary I had prayed for. The massive chain-link gates were torn open, twisted metal hanging from the hinges like ruined lace. The guard shack was dark, the windows blown out. There were no floodlights, no guards, just a dark, gaping mouth leading into the facility. I drove through the ruined gates without lifting my foot. The truck rattled over debris scattered on the road, shell casings, shattered glass, a riot helmet lying in a puddle. I was inside, but so were they. I saw the main bunker ahead, a brutalist concrete slab rising out of the earth. The steel blast doors were closed. I steered the truck toward the loading dock, aiming for the heavy concrete ramp. I had a plan, a stupid, desperate plan. I lined up the truck. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I reached for the door handle. Sorry, old girl, I whispered to the truck. I locked the steering wheel straight. At the last second, I kicked the door open and threw myself out into the wet gravel. I hit the ground hard, rolling, rocks tearing at my uniform. Behind me, the truck kept going. It roared up the loading ramp and slammed into the steel blast doors of the bunker with the force of a bomb. Crash! The impact was deafening. The cab crumpled. The trailer jackknifed, slamming into the concrete wall. The sound of hissing steam and shattering glass filled the air. I lay in the mud, gasping for breath, clutching my ribs. I looked up. The crash had done its job. The noise was massive. It would draw them. And it did. From the woods, from the shadows of the guard shack, they came. The pack. They ignored me, drawn to the smoking wreckage of the truck, sniffing for the kill. I scrambled to my feet, limping toward the darkness of the maintenance shed I had spotted on the perimeter map. I had to hide. I had to find a phone. I had to warn someone that the delivery had arrived, and the recipient was dead. I dove into the shadows of the maintenance shed just as the first howl ripped through the air. It wasn't the deep, bone-rattling roar of the alpha. It was the frenzied, high-pitched yipping of the pack swarming the wreckage. They were tearing at the cab of my truck, metal screeching as they peeled the doors off like tin foil to get to the driver who wasn't there. The shed was unlocked, a small miracle. I slipped inside and eased the door shut, wincing as the rusted hinges groaned. It smelled of grease, old oil, and dust. I fumbled for my flashlight, keeping the beam low, sweeping the room. Workbench, tool chest, a riding mower. And there on the back wall, a gray metal box with a red handset. A landline. I limped over to it, my knee throbbing where I'd hit the gravel. I snatched the handset off the hook. Silence, no dial tone. The line was dead. Damn it! I slammed the receiver against the wall. Of course it was dead. If the gate was breached and the shack was destroyed, they had probably cut the power and comms first. These things were smart. They knew how to isolate their prey. I sank to the floor, leaning back against the cold concrete block wall. I checked my pockets. A pocket knife, a lighter, and the crumpled manifest the general had given me. No weapon, no radio. And outside, a pack of genetically modified nightmares was realizing their dinner had slipped away. I heard the noise from the truck stop. The screeching of metal died down. They knew. Then came the sniffing. It was loud, wet sniffing, right outside the shed door. I held my breath, my hand tightening around the useless pocket knife. The sniffing moved along the bottom crack of the door. I watched the shadow of paws, huge paws, pace back and forth in the moonlight seeping through the gap. A low growl vibrated the door frame. It knew I was in here, but this shed was built of cinder blocks and a steel door. It would take them time to get in, time I didn't have. My eyes darted around the room, desperate. They landed on a heavy, yellow canister in the corner, oxyacetylene, a welding rig. An idea, insane and dangerous, sparked in my brain. I crawled over to the tanks. I checked the valves. Full. I grabbed the torch handle and the striker. I wasn't going to fight them with a knife. If they wanted to come in, I was going to give them a warm welcome. But before I could drag the tanks to the door, a sound from the other side of the shed froze me. Clang! It came from a ventilation grate high up on the back wall. I looked up. The grate was screwed into the block, about 8 feet off the ground. Clang! Something was in the vent, something heavy. I aimed my flashlight at it. 2 long, dark fingers curled through the slats of the grate. They pulled. The metal groaned. The screws popped out of the concrete like bullets. The grate fell to the floor with a crash. A face appeared in the opening. It wasn't a wolf. It was wrong. It was hairless, pale, with skin that looked stretched too tight over its skull. Its eyes were milky white, blind-looking, but it turned its head directly toward me. It hissed, a sound like a leaking steam pipe. This wasn't part of the pack outside. This was something else, something that lived inside the walls of Sector 4. The rake, the pale crawler, whatever the internet called it, it was squeezing its way into the shed. It moved like a spider, limbs disjointed and too long. I backed away, fumbling with the striker for the welding torch. "Get back!" I yelled, my voice cracking. The pale thing dropped to the floor. It stood up on its back legs, hunched over, standing between me and the door. It smiled, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Outside, the wolves started throwing themselves against the steel door. Wham! Wham! I was trapped. Wolves at the door, a monster in the room. I cracked the valve on the acetylene tank. The smell of garlic filled the air. I cracked the oxygen. I squeezed the handle. HISSSSS. The pale creature cocked its head, confused by the sound. It took a step toward me, its claws clicking on the concrete. I struck the flint. Whoosh! A jet of blue-white flame, 3,000 degrees hot, roared from the tip of the torch. The creature shrieked and scrambled back, shielding its eyes. The heat in the small room rose instantly. "You want some?" I screamed, sweeping the flame in a wide arc. "Come on." I wasn't a soldier. I was a truck driver. But right now, I was a man holding a lightsaber made of fire, and I wasn't going down without burning this whole place to the ground. The wolves outside stopped banging. The pale thing hissed and backed into the corner. For a second, I thought I had the upper hand. Then the floor beneath my feet trembled. A deep, resonant thrumming started, vibrating through the soles of my boots. The concrete floor in the center of the shed began to crack. This wasn't the wolves, this wasn't the crawler, this was the alpha, and it wasn't coming through the door, it was coming from below. The concrete erupted. It didn't crack, it detonated. Chunks of foundation the size of engine blocks were thrown into the air as the floor of the maintenance shed buckled upward. Dust and gravel filled the room instantly, blinding me, choking the air with the taste of pulverized stone. I threw myself backward, scrambling away from the epicenter, the welding torch still hissing in my hand. Through the haze of dust, a massive, dark shape rose from the earth. It shook itself, sending a spray of dirt and debris against the metal walls. It was the Mississippi Alpha. It had survived the crash. It had survived the impact into the bunker wall. And in its blind, unstoppable rage, it had dug through the earth and the concrete foundation to get to the only living thing it could smell: me. The magnesium flare had burned out, but the wound on its shoulder was a raw, blackened crater. It looked down at me, towering over the ruins of the floor, its chest heaving. It didn't look like an animal anymore. It looked like a god of war. The pale crawler in the corner hissed, a high, threatened sound. It was a mistake. The alpha snapped its head toward the sound. It didn't hesitate. It didn't posture. It moved with a speed that defied its size. It lunged across the small room, a blur of shadow. The crawler tried to leap, its long limbs scrabbling for the vent, but the alpha caught it in midair. The sound was sickening, wet and heavy, like a watermelon being smashed with a sledgehammer. The alpha slammed the pale creature into the cinder block wall, pinning it there. The crawler slashed with its claws, rake marks appearing on the alpha's muzzle, but the wolf didn't even flinch. It clamped its jaws around the crawler's neck and pulled. I didn't watch the rest. I scrambled for the door. The wolves outside had stopped banging, likely sensing the titan that had just entered the room. I kicked the latch, threw the door open, and tumbled out into the rain. The pack was there, 4 of them standing in a semicircle in the mud, their green eyes glowing. They looked at me, muscles tensed to spring. Then they looked past me into the shed. A low, vibrating growl emanated from the darkness behind me. The alpha stepped out. It dropped the ruined, limp body of the crawler onto the gravel. It looked at the pack, then let out a short, sharp bark. The pack retreated. They stepped back, heads low, tails tucked. They were submitting. This wasn't just a wolf, it was the king, and it had just claimed this territory. I didn't wait to see if I was part of the hierarchy. I ran. I sprinted toward the only structure left standing, the main bunker. The truck crash had destroyed the blast doors, leaving a jagged, smoking opening in the side of the concrete fortress. It looked like the entrance to hell, but it was my only chance. I could hear the heavy paws thudding on the wet earth behind me. It was coming. It wasn't rushing, it was loping. It knew I had nowhere to go. I reached the wreckage of my truck. The cab was unrecognizable, flattened against the wall. I vaulted over a piece of the twisted frame and squeezed through the gap in the blast doors. Inside, the air was different. It was cold, sterile, and smelled of ozone and copper. "Help!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the vast, dark space. "Security, anyone!" I shined my flashlight around. I was on a catwalk overlooking a massive warehouse floor. Below me were rows of heavy-duty cages. My heart stopped. The cages were open, all of them. And on the floor, bodies, men in private security uniforms. Some were dragged halfway into cages, some were just pieces. I realized then why the gate was open, why the radio was dead, why the gate control voice had told me not to come in. Sector 4 hadn't fallen because of my delivery. Sector 4 had fallen hours ago. I hadn't brought the monster to the prison. I had brought the monster to the buffet. I heard the scraping of claws on metal behind me. The Alpha was squeezing through the breach in the blast doors. It entered the facility, sniffing the air. It didn't look at me. It looked down at the warehouse floor, at the open cages, at the slaughter. It threw its head back and howled, a sound that was amplified by the acoustics of the bunker, until it felt like the building itself was screaming. From the shadows of the warehouse, from the dark corners of the ceiling, from the open cages below, eyes opened. Amber eyes, green eyes, dozens of them. The prisoners of Sector 4 were loose, and the Alpha had just come home to lead them. The concrete erupted. It didn't crack, it detonated. Chunks of foundation the size of engine blocks were thrown into the air as the floor of the maintenance shed buckled upward. Dust and gravel filled the room instantly, blinding me, choking the air with the taste of pulverized stone. I threw myself backward, scrambling away from the epicenter, the welding torch still hissing in my hand. Through the haze of dust, a massive, dark shape rose from the earth. It shook itself, sending a spray of dirt and debris against the metal walls. It was the Mississippi Alpha. It had survived the crash. It had survived the impact into the bunker wall, and in its blind, unstoppable rage, it had dug through the earth and the concrete foundation to get to the only living thing it could smell: me. The magnesium flare had burned out, but the wound on its shoulder was a raw, blackened crater. It looked down at me, towering over the ruins of the floor, its chest heaving. It didn't look like an animal anymore. It looked like a god of war. The pale crawler in the corner hissed, a high, threatened sound. It was a mistake. The Alpha snapped its head toward the sound. It didn't hesitate. It didn't posture. It moved with a speed that defied its size. It lunged across the small room, a blur of shadow. The crawler tried to leap, its long limbs scrabbling for the vent, but the Alpha caught it in midair. The sound was sickening, wet and heavy, like a watermelon being smashed with a sledgehammer. The Alpha slammed the pale creature into the cinder block wall, pinning it there. The crawler slashed with its claws, rake marks appearing on the Alpha's muzzle, but the wolf didn't even flinch. It clamped its jaws around the crawler's neck and pulled. I didn't watch the rest. I scrambled for the door. The wolves outside had stopped banging, likely sensing the titan that had just entered the room. I kicked the latch, threw the door open, and tumbled out into the rain. The pack was there, 4 of them standing in a semicircle in the mud, their green eyes glowing. They looked at me, muscles tensed to spring. Then they looked past me into the shed. A low, vibrating growl emanated from the darkness behind me. The Alpha stepped out. It dropped the ruined, limp body of the crawler onto the gravel. It looked at the pack, then let out a short, sharp bark. The pack retreated. They stepped back, heads low, tails tucked. They were submitting. This wasn't just a wolf, it was the king, and it had just claimed this territory. I didn't wait to see if I was part of the hierarchy. I ran. I sprinted toward the only structure left standing, the main bunker. The truck crash had destroyed the blast doors, leaving a jagged, smoking opening in the side of the concrete fortress. It looked like the entrance to hell, but it was my only chance. I could hear the heavy paws thudding on the wet earth behind me. It was coming. It wasn't rushing, it was loping. It knew I had nowhere to go. I reached the wreckage of my truck. The cab was unrecognizable, flattened against the wall. I vaulted over a piece of the twisted frame and squeezed through the gap in the blast doors. Inside, the air was different. It was cold, sterile, and smelled of ozone and copper. "Help!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the vast, dark space. "Security, anyone!" I shined my flashlight around. I was on a catwalk overlooking a massive warehouse floor. Below me were rows of heavy-duty cages. My heart stopped. The cages were open, all of them. And on the floor, bodies, men in private security uniforms. Some were dragged halfway into cages, some were just pieces. I realized then why the gate was open, why the radio was dead, why the gate control voice had told me not to come in. Sector 4 hadn't fallen because of my delivery. Sector 4 had fallen hours ago. I hadn't brought the monster to the prison. I had brought the monster to the buffet. I heard the scraping of claws on metal behind me. The Alpha was squeezing through the breach in the blast doors. It entered the facility, sniffing the air. It didn't look at me. It looked down at the warehouse floor, at the open cages, at the slaughter. It threw its head back and howled, a sound that was amplified by the acoustics of the bunker, until it felt like the building itself was screaming. From the shadows of the warehouse, from the dark corners of the ceiling, from the open cages below, eyes opened. Amber eyes, green eyes, dozens of them. The prisoners of Sector 4 were loose, and the Alpha had just come home to lead them. I didn't stay to watch the reunion. While the Alpha was howling its victory song to the legion of nightmares below, I was running. I sprinted along the metal catwalk, the grating rattling under my boots. The sound drew their attention. Below me, a dozen heads snapped up. I saw things that shouldn't exist, creatures with too many limbs, massive bears with mange-ridden skin, and things that looked like men but moved like insects. They shrieked, a chorus of hunger, and started climbing the support pillars. But the Alpha didn't climb. It just watched me. It stood in the center of the slaughter, surrounded by dead security guards, and stared up at me with those intelligent amber eyes. It didn't need to chase me anymore. It had an army now. It let out a huff, almost a laugh, and turned its attention back to the cages. I reached the end of the catwalk. A heavy steel door labeled emergency exit, alarm WILL sound. I didn't care about alarms. I hit the crash bar. The door flew open, and I stumbled out into the cool, wet night air. I wasn't outside the fence, but I was out of the bunker. I was on a rear loading platform overlooking a dense ravine. I didn't stop. I jumped the railing, sliding down the muddy embankment, tearing my uniform on briars and rocks. I scrambled until I hit the creek bed at the bottom. The water was freezing, but it washed the smell of the Alpha off me. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I didn't stick to the roads. I moved through the deep woods, guided only by the distant sound of sirens on the highway. It took me 6 hours to hike back to civilization. I came out near a gas station in a town called Slade. I used the payphone to call a cab. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my dispatcher. I knew that if I made a report, I would disappear just like the guards at Sector 4. I'm recording this from a motel room 3 states away. I've burned my uniform. I've shaved my head. I'm driving a car I bought for cash under a fake name. But I can't stop thinking about what I saw in that bunker. I keep checking the news. Nothing. No reports of a massacre at a military base. No reports of a monster truck crash on the exit ramp. The government is good at cleaning up messes. They probably blamed it on a gas leak or a training accident. They probably buried those guards in closed caskets and paid off the families. But they couldn't catch everything. Before I left the catwalk, I looked down one last time. I saw a body near the control room. It was a security guard. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't torn apart. He looked like he had died fighting. I saw his name tag in the glare of the emergency lights. Sawyer. I don't know if Sawyer made it out. I don't know if anyone made it out. But if you're listening to this and you see a job posting for overnight security in the Daniel Boone National Forest, don't take it. The Mississippi Alpha isn't in a cage anymore. It's in command. And I have a feeling that Sector 4 was just the beginning. I'm going dark now, but I'm not the only one who saw what happened there. There is a recording, a testimony from inside the guard shack that night. If you want to know the truth about what was waiting for me in that bunker, you need to hear his side of the story.